I mean, who knew the page number would be the hardest part of formatting a book? Who knew? Hello and welcome back to another AuthorTube video on this channel. My name is Robin. If you're new, I post videos about everything to do with AuthorTube every Saturday. Today I will be talking about my personal publishing experience. I have a few books that are self-published, and I just wanted to take a video to talk about the whole process, how I feel about it, and what I plan to do going forward. I don't think I've made that many videos about my personal experience and how I really feel about what I've put out there and what I plan to do, so this video is going to be exactly that. So the first book I published was The Boathouse, and I published that last year in 2020. I wrote it in January and I published it in March. So I published it right around the time the pandemic started here in Toronto. I really wanted to see whether I could write a book in a month, and that's why I had written it in January. I knew before I began to write the book that I was going to self-publish this one because the idea I had for it and how it turned out in the end, I just felt like it was more suited for a self-publishing route. I didn't think of the genre that it could be associated with. I felt it was very niche and I wasn't sure if any publisher would want to pick up this book. It's also only 50,000 words in length, and I didn't feel like dragging it out or adding in words just to add in words. I felt the story took 50,000 words to write, so I wanted it to keep it that length as well. I was always intrigued by the idea of hybrid publishing, so trying out both self and traditional publishing. Ever since I heard Brandon Sanderson talk about it in one of his lectures, he himself, I believe, is traditionally published, but he mentioned that some authors succeed by trying out different methods. I had the idea of trying this as well. I wanted to start with self-publishing and then move to traditional publishing afterwards. And like I said earlier, The Boathouse, as soon as I had written it, and maybe even before that, I knew that this would be a book that I would try to self-publish. I didn't know anything about the whole process when I began that book. I simply wrote it and I used Draft Digital to publish the ebook version onto Amazon, as well as all the other book distributors that distribute digitally. I didn't really market it at all. I just put it out there and it kind of got swallowed up by the internet, I guess. So I quickly learned from that mistake. The series that I was planning to write afterwards, I adopted more of a strategy. In terms of how I feel about the book The Boathouse, I feel pretty good about it now. I'm actually editing it for print, and I'm really excited because I don't know why I had this idea in the beginning that I only wanted to publish for ebook, because I myself love print books. Reading digitally is not the same for me. Even if I have a Kindle or some kind of reading device, I will always prefer to have the physical print version in front of me. I'm already staring at a screen for so many hours of the day. I just want a break from that. Print books are I feel like it's just not comparable to just a digital page, a digital screen. There's just something magical about it. I don't know. Or I'm just traditional. It could be any one of those things or all of them put together. Anyway, the point is I highly prefer print over digital. So now I've decided to release The Boathouse in print version. I'm really excited because this will be my first book that I release in print paperback. I tried to use Draft to Digital to format it at first, but I believe Draft to Digital is having some issues with their print process, so I decided to format it myself. And that's what I'm working on as of right now. The only thing I have left to add is the page numbers, and for some reason, I cannot figure it out. I will find a way to figure it out. I mean, who knew the page number would be the hardest part of formatting a book? Who knew? Anyway, so that's The Journey of the Boathouse. It's my favorite out of all the books I have out so far. The reason is because I feel it's more reflective of my current writing. The series that I published after The Boathouse, the idea for it actually came to me back in high school. I also wrote the book, or wrote part of the book, or wrote a lot of the book back then as well. I believe I started it in grade 8. So that was a long time ago. It definitely has more of a YA feel because I wrote it as a YA person, but for that exact reason, I feel like it's not as reflective of my current writing. The idea for the boathouse I had actually when I was Airbnb-ing at a place that was very creepy. The setting, as soon as I saw it, I knew I had to write a book about it. I knew I had to create something out of this. It could not go unused. That was back in 2018. I believe it was the summer of 2018 when I visited that boathouse. But I assure you, the contents of the book is purely fictional. None of that happened. The characters as well are completely made up, though the setting may be very heavily influenced by something that actually exists. I always say that the setting in that book is a character in itself. The book is also a psychological suspense horror. It's closer to what I plan to write in the future. And in many ways, I feel like my writing has evolved a lot since how it was when I first wrote the series. Moving on to the series that I wrote, I basically have a 3-part series out. It's a trilogy, I guess you would call it. That's a young adult action-adventure dark fantasy. The prequel to it is called Benny's Story, and it's a pretty short 10,000-word novella that introduces some characters that will show up later on in the story. It's sort of like an origin story for one of the characters. The main character in the actual series, though, is another person. It's a girl named Gabby, and she goes to live with a scientist who specializes in curing strange diseases. Throughout the 3 books, they have adventures trying to rid the world of this strange disease. The writing is definitely more on the action side. It's less contemplative like the boathouse is. It's less psychological and more action-packed. So I always tell people if they prefer action, the series may be more suited for them. But if they prefer more contemplative, slow burn, psychological, making you think kind of stuff, the boathouse is definitely more suited for that. Both the series and the standalone have dark elements to it and a bit of the supernatural sprinkled in, but it's completely set in current reality. Both of them are. In terms of how I feel about the series, because I started it so long ago, I wrote most of what would become the first 2 books back in high school. It's a little bit of a self-insert, which I'm not particularly fond of. At times in the book, Gabby is completely the opposite of me, and she does things that are completely opposite of what I would do, but as a whole, it has a little too much of that than I'm comfortable with. I don't think self-inserts are as bad or as, taboo as people label them out to be. I mean, if you think of some of the great writers out there, Stephen King, for example, a lot of his books are about a middle-aged male writer. Look at The Shining. Look at Misery. Even he does a bit of self-inserting here and there. I don't think self-inserts are as bad as people make them out to be honest. But I also really want to experiment with creating characters that are completely different from me and are completely different from what I would do in specific situations. I really want to explore more of that. The characters in the boathouse are definitely further away from me and further away from the reactions and things that I would do. I really want to explore more of that in my future books, write about people of different personalities than me and who would have different reactions to things than I would. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the covers and the outsourcing I did for my books. The boathouse I did entirely myself, entirely. The cover design, I designed it and I drew it and created it. I also edited it myself. I had a few beta readers for it, not so much CPs, more, beta readers. I didn't hire a professional editor for it. Like I said, I just self-edited it and used beta readers. And as I talked about before, I didn't market it at all. I just put it out there and let people know that I had a book out. The series, on the other hand, I did a lot more marketing, still not as much as I will be doing for my future books, but just a lot more than I did for the boathouse. I had the covers designed by a cover artist, and I was really happy with the results. I think they look great. I also hired a professional editor for all the books. I wanted to stick to just one editor for the entire series. I wanted one person to have the whole story. I didn't want to switch editors. It's a linear story, so you have to kind of know the beginning to understand the end and such. Part of the reason why I hired a professional editor is because I was actually less confident about the content in the series than I was about the content in the boathouse because I wrote it so long ago. The things that my editor pointed out the most were just things that didn't make sense in reality. There was a bit about the character being adopted, but the adoption process didn't make sense, so I rewrote a lot of the book to fix those things. It's just things that my young self, my 8th grade self, did not understand about the world. So I felt having the professional editor point those things out to me was very helpful. The boathouse, I felt, didn't need as much of that. It's very setting-based and atmospheric. It's sort of designed to mess with your mind. It's just a completely different beast. All in all, though, I'm pretty happy with the outcome. I didn't really expect any more than I got out of it. I decided not to run any ads on either of the books. I haven't run any paid ads on the boathouse nor on the series. I'm still just experimenting with the whole process, seeing what works and what doesn't. Even if I just add a bit more each time I publish, learn something new each time, I'm happy with that because I know the next thing that I put out there will be even better than the previous one. Now that I have self-published 5 books, I am more confident for the next series that I'm going to do. I've learned a lot along the way and I plan to apply that to what I'm going to be doing in the future, and I'm really excited to get started with it. And I'm excited how it's all going to turn out. I just wanted to do a little reflection video on what I have done so far, how I feel about it, what I plan to do in the future, since I am in this liminal space between series and between books. I should be out of this liminal space by next month. I have a really cool project that's coming up, which I will talk about later. Right now, I have not yet mentioned it, but stay tuned because I'm really excited for it. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you sticking around and checking out these videos. Subscribe down below if you haven't already to keep up with my journey. Bye for now.